Hey there, thanks for joining me today. Have you ever felt that earth-shattering moment when everything you thought was real just crumbles? When the person who promised to love you forever is secretly plotting your destruction? I was that guy who believed I had it all, until I discovered my wife was selling my company's secrets to my business rival, while still wearing my wedding ring. Pull up a chair and let me tell you how I turned the ultimate betrayal into my greatest comeback. I built Miles Precision Technologies from nothing. Literally nothing. When Dad got laid off from the Cleveland steel mill when I was just 12, I watched him crumble under the weight of feeling like he'd failed us. That day, I promised myself I'd never be vulnerable like that. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously to earn an MIT scholarship. Turned down Lockheed Martin to start in my garage. Now my company designs cutting-edge systems for the Pentagon, NASA, and Homeland Security. Valued at over $30 million. The Pacific Heights mansion, luxury cars, board seats. I had everything a man could want. Everything except peace. I met Sabrina at a charity event for children's education. She literally took my breath away. Tall, graceful, with this laugh that made everyone around her smile. Former model turned philanthropist, with a passion for helping underprivileged kids access education. Her father, Victor, was a financier who'd faced some setbacks, but she never seemed bothered by it. "You're different," she told me on our 3rd date, looking into my eyes with what I thought was admiration. "Most men in your position just want to show off their success. You actually want to use it to make a difference." I fell hard. When we married, I felt like I'd finally claimed my trophy for surviving against all odds. Someone beautiful and compassionate who understood my drive because she had her own. We were unstoppable together. At least, that's what I believed. The first cracks appeared so subtly I almost missed them. Have you ever felt something shift in your relationship, but couldn't quite put your finger on it? That feeling that something's just off? Leave a comment if you've experienced that invisible fissure before it becomes a canyon. "You're so distant lately," she said one night, her voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "All you think about is that company." I remember looking up from my laptop, surprised. "This company is what gives us everything, Sabrina." "There's more to life than work, Granton," she replied, turning away before I could respond. It seemed like a normal couple's disagreement at the time. Just 2 people with busy lives trying to find balance. But looking back, I realized she was laying groundwork, creating a narrative of an absent workaholic husband. Then came the foundation galas, exclusive events to raise funds for her children's education charity. Suddenly, Declan Prescott was everywhere. Sole heir to Prescott Global Holdings, with that smug smile of inherited wealth. He'd shake my hand while his eyes lingered on my wife without bothering to hide it. "Declan's interest is community engagement," Sabrina explained, her hand resting on my arm. "His sponsorship will help hundreds of children." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We were partners. A team. Until that Tuesday evening when I was checking our joint accounts. That moment. God, I can still feel the cold wave washing over me. A $50,000 transfer from our joint account to Elwood Capital, her father's sinking company. The transfer had originated from her foundation office. It seemed careless. Or deliberate. Something deep in my gut twisted. You know that feeling when your body recognizes a truth before your mind can fully process it? That terrible knowing? I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I called my sister, Celeste, a federal judge with a predator's instinct for justice. "Don't act yet," she said, her voice measured like she was in chambers. "Watch. When she makes a mistake, you strike once, decisively." Our wedding anniversary was approaching. I'd been planning a trip to Bora Bora for months. Private island suite, dinner under the stars. I'd even acquired a 1937 ruby necklace through a specialist in Geneva. The exact shade of red that matched the sunset on our honeymoon in Bali. Perhaps we could still fix things, if she wanted to. It's funny how life delivers its most devastating blows on ordinary days. I needed a flight confirmation code from Sabrina's email. Her laptop sat in the living room. I opened it, moved the mouse to wake the screen. And there it was. A new email had just arrived. The subject line froze my blood. Divorce strategy and asset division structure. Urgent. I stared at those words for 10 eternal seconds, unblinking. Then I clicked. Have you ever had that moment when your entire reality shifts? When everything you believed about your life shatters in an instant? If you have, leave a comment below. Sometimes, sharing our darkest moments helps us find our way back to the light. What unfolded before me was a meticulous legal strategy to secure full marital asset ownership. File first to control the narrative and leverage emotional distance to establish abandonment. She wasn't just preparing, she had declared war, and I was no longer the man who simply endures. The email was from Remington and Tate LLP, one of those law firms with an address on a high floor, and a client list that reads like the Fortune 500. The sender, Eli Sandhurst, was the managing partner who specialized in high-asset divorces, the man who'd built his career dismantling marriages and fortunes with surgical precision. My stomach turned to concrete as I scrolled through the message. It laid out a comprehensive strategy. Sabrina should file first to establish narrative control. Position herself as the abandoned wife of a workaholic tech executive. Document her meetings with Declan Prescott as incidental evidence, if discovered a pre-planned excuse. Most damning was the suggestion to create a shell trust to secure funds from our accounts, ostensibly to assist her father's business, but clearly designed to launder marital assets beyond my reach. This wasn't a betrayal of impulse, this was calculated, engineered, a conspiracy. I navigated to her archived messages folder, half hoping to find nothing. Instead, I uncovered 37 emails between Sabrina and Declan, spanning the past 4 months. Their exchanges discussed securing Miles' precision from within. The attachments made me grip the desk until my knuckles whitened. St. Regis hotel receipts, first-class tickets to Bermuda for 2. Half-dressed selfies taken in a suite I'd never seen. A memo stood out. Declan needs Pentagon contract details to assess sustainable investment potential. They weren't just planning to take my wife and money, they wanted my company. My life's work. Then came the final blow. A message to her father. Once I file at the right moment, Granton loses everything, and Elwood Capital is saved. 6 minutes passed, while I just breathed. Slow, measured breaths. The kind you take when you're bleeding internally but can't show it. I opened the Notes app on my phone and created a new draft. 1. Protect assets. 2. Gather evidence. 3. Set trap. And disappear. I forwarded all emails, files, and images to an encrypted account on a private server in Zurich. Then I carefully closed the laptop, placing it exactly as I'd found it, and sat back on the sofa. My hands weren't shaking. My mind had shifted into a cold, analytical state I'd only experienced once before, when my father was laid off, and I realized no one was coming to save us. I called Thatcher Reynolds. We'd been MIT classmates before he went to law school. Now he specialized in corporate law and federal financial crimes. I need to see you now. It's urgent. 2 hours later, we sat in his wood-paneled office overlooking the bay. I'd brought copies of everything on a secure drive. He studied the materials, his expression growing grimmer with each swipe. If she's passing internal information to Prescott, this constitutes intentional asset transfer for gain, he said, removing his glasses. We can file for divorce first, possibly open a criminal case if they push this too far. He leaned forward. My advice? Shield your assets immediately. Over the next 72 hours, I opened 4 bank accounts across 3 states: Utah, Texas, Virginia. I transferred liquid assets, stocks, and government bonds into non-marital property forms, verified by Celeste. Miles' precision ownership was moved into an independent trust with Celeste as overseer, granting her full authority to reject any divorce interference. That evening I prepared dinner at home as if nothing had changed. Sabrina returned from her latest foundation event, and I asked about the gala. She smiled, that perfect smile, the one that used to make my heart race but now made my skin crawl. She hugged me from behind, her perfume enveloping me, but it wasn't just her scent anymore. It carried notes of something else. Of him. I'll be in Washington next week, I said casually. Emergency military contract. She nodded, didn't ask questions, just kissed my cheek and disappeared upstairs. As I watched her go, a single thought crystallized in my mind. You'll drop your mask just as I end this charade. Step 2 of my plan, gather evidence. Not just enough to win a divorce, but enough to destroy them both completely and irreversibly. Sometimes the only way to find peace is to face the painful truth. Share your thoughts if you've had to make tough choices to save yourself. Walking away isn't always giving up. Sometimes it's the first step toward reclaiming your power. I contacted Trident Secure Services, a private investigation firm specializing in infidelity and corporate espionage cases. Their offices occupied the fifth floor of an unremarkable building in the financial district, a place deliberately designed to be forgettable. Their fees made even me wince, minus $15,000 up front, plus $2,500 daily. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about truth and vengeance. "We'll need comprehensive surveillance," I told Marcus Reed, their lead investigator, a former FBI agent with eyes that missed nothing. He'd built his reputation handling cases for tech billionaires and foreign diplomats. His office was meticulously nondescript, the kind of place you'd walk past 1,000 times without noticing. "I need to know everything. Schedules, conversations, exchanges. Every detail." "We understand discretion, Mr. Miles," Reed assured me. "Nothing leaves this room unless you authorize it." 2 agents were assigned to shadow Sabrina, one posing as a Foundation volunteer, another as a delivery driver working the Pacific Heights route. Within a week, they delivered their first comprehensive report, complete with time-stamped photographs, video clips, and GPS location data that made my blood run cold. The pattern was unmistakable and methodical. Tuesdays through Thursdays, she met Declan at the Darlington Hotel, 18th floor, room 1842, a corner suite with bay views. Wednesdays were longest, sometimes 5 hours. Thursdays were briefest, usually just long enough for lunch and what the surveillance reports clinically described as, quote, intimate activities. Fridays, she worked late at the Foundation, but actually drove to Declan's private estate in Sausalito, a modernist concrete and glass monstrosity overlooking the water, protected by a 12-foot security fence and private security. The surveillance photos turned my stomach, not just the intimate touches and stolen kisses captured through telephoto lenses. That pain had already calcified into something harder and colder. But the manila envelopes, the USB drives, the rolled blueprint tubes and document folios passing between them. In one image, they stood on Declan's terrace, champagne glasses raised in a toast while overlooking the bay. My bay. My city. "Can we get closer?" I asked Reed, pointing to the documents in the photos. "I need to know what's in those files, what exactly she's selling." "For that," he replied, leaning back in his chair, "we need to get inside." While Sabrina attended her twice-weekly yoga session and had her car serviced at the dealership, a 4-hour window of predictable absence, a Trident technician and I installed surveillance equipment throughout our home. Military-grade microphones embedded in the walls of her office, button-sized cameras disguised as screw heads in the bedroom light fixtures, and another hiding in the space between wine bottles and our liquor cabinet. Motion sensors that would activate recording whenever she entered certain rooms, all of it transmitting encrypted data to a secure server I could access remotely. Untraceable. Undetectable without specialized equipment. The technician, a former NSA specialist with delicate hands and perpetually furrowed brows, assured me that even a professional sweep would likely miss these devices. "This is state-of-the-art," he murmured as he calibrated the last microphone. "The same tech we used in Belgrade during the embassy crisis." Each night, I watched another episode of this reality show. The double life of the woman I once loved. The woman who wore my ring while planning my destruction. I watched her speak differently on the phone with Declan. Her voice lower, more confident, stripped of the vulnerability she'd always shown me. I watched her pace our bedroom while strategizing with her father, her face animated with an excitement I hadn't seen in years. But the audio recordings were what truly gutted me. "He doesn't suspect a thing," Sabrina laughed during a call with Declan, her voice echoing through my headphones as I sat in my darkened study. "So obsessed with his precious company. What could be more pathetic than a man who built his life around circuit boards and investor meetings?" "Just wait until I verify the insider information," Declan replied, his voice smooth with practiced charm. "Petrov will pour in the capital, and you'll be the youngest female CEO controlling a defense corporation. From trophy wife to power player. Quite the transformation." Later, a call to her father. "Dad, we've got him. Once I withdraw the assets at the right moment, Miles will collapse just like you did. But unlike you, he won't be getting back up. The difference is, we're smarter than he is. We know how to play this game." She actually giggled. When discussing with Declan the ruby necklace I'd bought for our anniversary. The one I'd sourced from a private collector in Geneva with stones that matched the exact shade of red she once told me, reminded her of the sunset on our honeymoon. "It's practically emotional compensation before the divorce," she said. "Let him feel generous now. It'll make it easier to take the rest later." At the office, Nina discovered an outgoing email from Eric Montroy, a recently hired engineer who'd come highly recommended from a prestigious tech firm. The email contained unofficial design plans transmitted to an account in Luxembourg that couldn't be traced through normal channels. When questioned by our security team, Eric broke quickly. He admitted Declan had contracted him to leak preliminary designs, worthless in themselves, but enough to mislead potential investors about our technological direction and valuation potential. He paid me $50,000, Eric confessed, his face gray with fear of both legal consequences and my reaction. Said it was just market research, nothing illegal. The realization hit me like ice water. Declan didn't just want Sabrina to take my personal assets. He wanted Miles Precision undervalued so he could acquire it through Petrov's subsidiary companies. Anton Petrov, the Russian financier with known connections to both legitimate defense contractors and shadowy private military companies. This wasn't just betrayal. It was corporate warfare with my life's work as collateral damage. "I'll be in Washington next week," I told Sabrina over dinner that evening, watching her face for reactions while keeping my own expression neutral. Emergency meeting with the Defense Logistics Agency. They've requested immediate consultations on the new procurement initiative. She nodded, her face betraying unmistakable relief that she couldn't quite disguise quickly enough. "How long will you be gone?" "Hard to say. These classified projects can drag on. Sometimes, weeks." "Of course," she said, reaching for my hand across the table. "I understand how important this is." I left the city the following morning, but instead of heading to the airport, I drove straight to Lake Oak Haven, to a lakeside cabin owned by Red Pine Retreat LLC, a shell company untraceable to me. The property existed off all official records connected to my name, purchased through 3 layers of corporate veils 5 years ago, as a contingency I never thought I'd need. The cabin was rustic but well-appointed, solar panels, satellite internet, built-in generators, and enough supplies to last months if necessary. From this isolated outpost surrounded by pine trees and silence, I transmitted all evidence, videos, recordings, emails, financial trajectories, to Thatcher through an encrypted channel that bounced through servers in 7 countries. I called Celeste, explaining the situation in clinical detail. She listened without interruption, then confirmed that all company assets had been transferred to non-marital property, under Massachusetts law. "The trust structure is airtight," she assured me. "Even the best attorneys won't breach it." Nina became the only person at Miles Precision who knew my actual location. To everyone else, I was working classified projects with the Pentagon. She would send daily updates through secure channels, keeping me informed while maintaining the illusion of my presence through carefully scheduled emails and conference calls I conducted remotely. That night, I stood on the wooden dock overlooking the still lake, where moonlight reflected like a silent blade across the black water. The pain had crystallized into something else, a cold, focused rage that clarified rather than clouded my thinking. A sense of purpose more powerful than anything I'd felt since founding the company. I was no longer hurting. I was waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. And at that exact moment, the USB drive Sabrina had just handed to Declan in the Darlington Hotel was being secretly duplicated by an FBI forensics team that I had quietly brought into the investigation. The reports from Nina came daily. Miles Precision was beginning to show hairline fractures, just as planned. Fletcher, a board member since our second funding round, a man who once championed my leadership through 2 market downturns, now called for an emergency session to protect shareholder interests amid leadership uncertainty. The irony wasn't lost on me. His loyalty had always been to his portfolio, not to me. Financial forums buzzed with rumors. Miles Precision leadership vacuum. Navy contract delays imminent. Founder absence raises red flags. 3 engineers resigned within 5 days, citing company instability in their exit interviews. 2 smaller partners suspended negotiations, claiming public relations concerns. All part of the plan. The company needed to look vulnerable. Declan needed to smell blood in the water. I watched through the hidden camera as Fletcher met Declan at the Ascend Club, that mahogany-paneled sanctuary where San Francisco's elite discuss matters too sensitive for boardrooms. The camera, disguised as a smoke detector, had been installed by Trident's team the previous day after a substantial payment to the club's head of maintenance. "The situation's precarious," Fletcher said, swirling his scotch. "Granton's absence has destabilized the executive team. The board is concerned." Declan leaned forward, the predatory gleam in his eyes unmistakable even through the grainy footage. "Prescott Strategic Ventures could provide emergency capital infusion, a structured investment to stabilize the company while maintaining current leadership." "What percentage would you require?" Fletcher asked. Initially, 30% with 2 board seats, just enough to provide stability. I now understood his full strategy. Create internal chaos, force a crisis, then swoop in as the White Knight, only to dismantle everything once inside. It was time to set the trap. I instructed our design team to create Project Icarus, a fictitious $60 million Department of Defense contract for next-generation guidance systems. The documentation was exquisite in its deception: security clearance watermarks, Pentagon authorization codes, technical specifications that appeared groundbreaking to the untrained eye but were actually elegant nonsense. Make it convincing but fundamentally flawed, I told my head engineer, something that would pass initial scrutiny but collapse under serious technical review. The forged documents were accidentally left in the office printer tray on a day when Sabrina was scheduled to visit headquarters to collect tax documents. Meanwhile, I had Celeste call our home phone, deliberately mentioning Project Icarus with calculated vagueness, knowing the microphones we'd planted would pick up every word. "The Icarus funding came through," she said, following my script perfectly. "$60 million with expansion options. The DoD seems very committed to the platform." That evening, surveillance confirmed Sabrina delivered the documents to Declan at the Darlington Hotel. Within hours, Declan contacted Anton Petrov, the Russian financier with questionable connections to both legitimate defense contractors and shadowy private military interests. Petrov, still smarting from being misled by the previous batch of outdated designs, was initially hesitant. "If this proves inaccurate again, you'll have no further opportunities to make amends," he warned Declan. "My patience has limits." Declan forwarded the complete Icarus documentation. 2 days later, Petrov agreed to inject $20 million in exchange for 35% ownership when the company went public in the anticipated IPO, a valuation far below market value, but precisely what someone would pay for a distressed asset with promising new technology. The rumor mill turned faster. Declan whispered to key investors that Miles Precision was on the verge of securing an exclusive NATO contract for long-range attack drone guidance systems. Internal stock valuations in the private investment round suddenly jumped to an estimated $70 million. Nina played her role perfectly, feigning slow, confused responses when questioned about the unusual market activity, creating the impression that Miles Precision was indeed hiding a major deal. Meanwhile, Sabrina began encountering unexpected obstacles. She discovered that bank accounts she previously accessed freely now required my authentication. When she visited our financial institution in person, she was informed. The accounts have been placed under legal hold pursuant to divorce filing in Massachusetts. She called her attorney, only to learn I had already filed for divorce, accompanied by a comprehensive dossier of damaging evidence. Her panicked call to Declan came through the encrypted feed from our home surveillance. "Something's wrong. Granton's locked the accounts, and he's filed for divorce with evidence." How could he know? Declan's response was cold and dismissive. "It changes nothing. We still have Icarus. Petrov is committed. Once the deal closes, it won't matter what Granton knows." But Sabrina wasn't easily reassured. "Are you certain Project Icarus is legitimate?" she pressed, her voice tight with anxiety. It seemed too convenient. At that exact moment, in a nondescript office in Washington, D.C., an FBI financial crime specialist was printing copies of the emails Declan had sent to Petrov. Emails that contained classified defense information and constituted multiple federal violations. The agent attached a simple note: "Material received from confidential source. Begin investigation." The response came immediately: "Proceed immediately. Priority level raised to urgent." The trap was sprung. Now I just had to wait for my enemies to realize they were drowning. After 3 weeks of strategic silence, I texted Sabrina. "We need to talk. Maison Renard, private room, 7 p.m. tomorrow." Maison Renard, where we'd celebrated our first anniversary. The evening she'd worn that midnight blue dress, and we'd stayed until the staff dimmed the lights. Before the cracks appeared. Before everything. I arrived early, dressed in my charcoal Brioni suit, the same one I'd worn when securing our first major government contract. A small recording device nestled in my breast pocket, no larger than a thumb drive. Thatcher waited in a separate dining section, close enough to intervene if needed. Sabrina arrived precisely on time, wearing a cream Chanel suit that probably cost more than what some of my engineers earned in a month. Her expression was composed but wary, the look of someone approaching a negotiation she believed she could win. The maitre d' escorted her to our secluded alcove. When she saw me, her face flickered with something between contempt and calculation. "Granton," she said, sliding into her seat. You're looking well for someone who's been away. I appreciate you coming, I replied, maintaining the diplomatic facade. Would you like some wine? Let's skip the pleasantries. Your lawyer contacted mine. You wanted to discuss settlement terms? I nodded, letting her believe she understood the situation. I think we can resolve this efficiently. She relaxed slightly, misreading my calm for weakness or resignation. I'm glad you're being reasonable. This doesn't have to be ugly. On that, we agree. I slid a leather portfolio across the table. My proposed settlement terms. She opened it with the confident air of someone expecting concessions. As she scanned the document, her expression transformed from self-assurance to shock. The settlement offered her the Lake Tahoe house, which I'd quietly had reappraised, revealing significant structural issues that reduced its value by 40%, a one-time payment of $500,000, no stock, no ongoing revenue shares, no involvement with Miles Precision, and a clause preventing her from making any public statements that could damage the company's reputation. This is insulting, she hissed, tossing the portfolio back. I'm entitled to half of everything. 8 years of marriage. I helped build your image, hosted your clients, supported your work. All while planning to destroy me, I replied, my voice level. I won't sign this. My lawyer will tear it apart. I thought you might say that. I placed a second folder on the table. This is the alternative. She opened it with angry, jerking movements that sent her water glass wobbling. Inside was a copy of a federal criminal complaint naming her as co-conspirator in 3 felonies, sharing classified defense information, corporate sabotage, and securities fraud with foreign involvement. The color drained from her face. You wouldn't. It's already filed, just not executed yet. Sign the settlement, and this gets buried. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Declan's name flashed on the screen. She answered with a sharp, "What?" I watched her face collapse as she listened. Even without hearing his side, I could piece together what was happening from her reactions. When? All of it? But how did they? Her eyes flicked to me, realization dawning. I'll call you back. She lowered the phone, her hand trembling. Declan's office was just raided by the FBI. They seized everything. Computers, phones, files. They're bringing him in for questioning right now. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Petrov has gone silent, cut all contact. Sign the agreement, I said quietly, or become a co-defendant. She stared at me, hatred and fear warring in her eyes. You set us up from the beginning. I shook my head slightly. No, I just let you dig the hole, then watched you walk into it. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she reached for the pen. I want to hear you say it, she whispered. Did any of it ever matter to you? Us? It did, I answered truthfully, until you decided I was worth more to you broken than whole. She signed the papers. Her signature a jagged scroll across the dotted line. Thatcher appeared as if on cue, collecting the documents and nodding discreetly. It will be filed within 2 hours, he confirmed. The divorce will be finalized according to these terms. Sabrina stood, purse clutched against her body like armor. Enjoy your empire, Granton. I hope it keeps you warm. She walked out of the restaurant without looking back, carrying nothing but her handbag and shredded dignity. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a message from Nina. Declan arrested. Looking at maximum 20 years. I replied with 3 words. It has begun. 3 weeks after our meeting at Maison Renard, the news broke nationwide. The Wall Street Journal ran it on their front page. Prescott Air indicted on federal charges. CNBC dedicated a special segment to the tech espionage scandal shaking Silicon Valley. Within days, it was everywhere. Declan Prescott was formally indicted on federal charges of financial fraud, mishandling classified defense information, and cross-border money laundering. The prosecution demanded $9 million in restitution payments and pushed for a 12-year sentence with no possibility of parole at Beaumont Low Federal Correctional Institution. During his deposition, facing overwhelming evidence and abandoned by his powerful father, Declan crumbled. He revealed everything: his arrangement with Petrov, Sabrina's willing participation, the elaborate plan to devalue and capture my company. The FBI was particularly interested in his communications with Petrov, whose connections to certain foreign defense contractors raised national security concerns. Sabrina avoided criminal charges due to our settlement agreement and her cooperation with investigators. But her fall was no less devastating. Her carefully crafted public image disintegrated overnight. The National Children's Academic Foundation was investigated and subsequently dissolved when auditors discovered it had been used to launder funds. Her name was quietly removed from every national philanthropic organization that had once celebrated her visionary leadership. She relocated to Phoenix, as far from San Francisco's elite circles as emotionally possible, rented a modest apartment, and began working as a real estate agent. Her social media went dark. She vanished from the charity gala circuit where she'd once reigned. One afternoon, Victor Elwood appeared at my office unannounced. He looked a decade older than when I'd last seen him, his once imposing frame bent with defeat, his eyes hollow with the particular shame that comes from watching your child destroy themselves. "She made terrible mistakes," he said after my assistant reluctantly showed him in. "We both did. But surely there's room for forgiveness? You loved her once." I studied him. This man who had encouraged his daughter to hollow out my life for his financial salvation. "She didn't lose what I gave her, Victor. She lost everything by betraying what was worth keeping." He left without another word. At Miles Precision, the rebuilding happened faster than anyone expected. Fletcher and 2 board members with connections to Prescott were forced to resign. I announced a legitimate contract with Naval Systems Command, $36 million over 5 years for advanced guidance systems, which had been in quiet negotiation for months before the crisis. Our stock recovered 28% within 8 weeks. I implemented new company policies, quarterly profit sharing for all employees, and the creation of the Miles Foundation, providing engineering scholarships to disadvantaged students, the kind of kids who, like me, worked 3 jobs to afford college application fees. Throughout the entire ordeal, Nina Caldwell remained my unfailing constant, never demanding, never betraying, never faltering. She managed the company during my strategic absence with such skill that several board members suggested she receive a VP position. One evening at the Lake Tahoe house, now converted to a company retreat property, we sat by the fireplace after everyone else had retired. The flames cast dancing shadows across her face as she looked at me with those perceptive eyes that had seen me at my worst and never flinched. "Do you still believe in love?" she asked quietly. I considered the question, turning my whiskey glass between my fingers. "No," I finally answered. "But I believe in the person who doesn't leave when the whole world turns away." She held my gaze, understanding exactly what I meant. For the first time in what felt like years, I allowed myself to truly feel the presence of another person, to let down the armor I'd been forced to wear. A year later, during the company's annual strategy retreat at the Lake Tahoe property, Celeste found me on the deck overlooking the water. "You survived," she said, raising her wine glass in a toast. "Not just survived," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. "I've cleared away the fire. Now I'm rebuilding on ground no one dares to touch." That evening, a text message arrived from an unknown number. "I still think if things had been different, we might have." It was Sabrina. I deleted the message without replying. Turning away from the phone, I took Nina's hand as we watched moonlight reflecting off the lake. The same view that had witnessed my darkest moment now framed something entirely new. "What are you thinking?" I asked her. She smiled, her fingers warm against mine. "I'm thinking you should start writing your story again. From the first chapter. Only this time, don't let anyone else hold the pen." I nodded and began anew. The old story had burned to ash. The betrayers had paid their price. Honor had been restored. I, Granton Miles, had risen from the ashes of betrayal. And this time, no one would take that from me. If this story resonated with you in any way, please hit that subscribe button. Sometimes the greatest comeback stories begin with the deepest betrayals. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild after someone tried to destroy what you created? Your story matters here.